And so now I invite Sister Janice Thome, who serves in Garden City, Kansas. And as you can see, she's serving the migrants, the immigrants, and people living on the margins. And I'm not going to say much more about her because she has a really cool story to tell. So, Sister Janice?
So here you see in the picture Sister Rosarita and I, and together we serve the Ministry of Presence, which our Dominican sisters began in 1997. And you see us beside our pickup, and we're probably one of the only religious groups that needs a pickup for our ministry, and you'll figure out in a little bit why. Our ministry is defined as a direct ministry of the economic poor, and it doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, why they're poor, just that they are in need. And we never ask why they're in need. We respond to families that are referred to us by other persons, other families, or agencies that know what we do. We start with a very simple presence to the person, letting them tell us what it is they want to address, what their need is. Then that allows them to direct the assistance. They say, we need this, and we try to find it for them. We act as liaisons between those in need and the already existing resources. So that linkage then gives us a foundation for advocacy on the behalf of anybody that's marginalized. We create resources where none exist, and that's where the pickup comes in. If you don't have money, even used furniture that's half priced is too much. So we take in gently used furniture, and we, like the little chair that you see part of there, and then we give it out to people for free. So that's one of the first things we started. So this is the definition, and I want to put some flesh on it. So first of all, I'd like to ask you to think of the times that you're on a trip with somebody. You're sitting side by side in the front seat, and you look out on the world from the same angle. And so in our ministry, that's what it feels like. We're side by side with the person, and we're looking out on life as they see it, and then going at their direction for the things they need. Now, when I'm in the car with the person, even if it's a friend, sometimes I share deeper than I would if I was face to face with them. And so that is one of the things that happens to us as we're in our ministry. Early on, I bit my tongue a lot because I would say, you need this, this, and this, much more than you need what you say you need. But I learned to keep my mouth shut, because once the thing that was right here got out of their way, they could see the other things. I'll give you an example. Gisela was beaten by her husband with the belt into the buckle. She's a real high-strung lady, so she got out of the trailer, went next door. The guy called the police. So her husband is in jail, and then he gets out, and she calls me and says, I want you to get him diversion. I said, I don't want to get him diversion. I want him to have to pay for what he did. She said, no. He's the dad of my children, and he's asked for my papers, and so I want him to be here for them and for me. I said, okay. On the outside, I'm doing it, but on the inside, I don't want to, because I didn't want her, when he went back to beating her, to be mad at me, because that's what usually happens. So in diversion, you get to do the anger management course. Well, I've seen people go through that, and it's like water off a duck's back, and they start all over. Well, that didn't happen in this case. He never beat her again at any kind of beating. She told me a couple of weeks into it, when he gets mad, he locks himself in the bedroom or he goes walking till he cools down. Then she was telling me he's teaching me some of these things, which she did need it as well. And then 3 years later, I'm driving her to the medical clinic that's for the poor, and she's getting ready to have her sonogram because she's expecting. And so I said, I bet you want a boy. And she said, yeah, because they had 3 girls. But she said, Raul wants a girl because he wants to be king of the castle. And in my head was, I thought he had changed. She comes out from the sonogram, and I know it's going to be a boy because she's got this half and half face. So I said, what is it? She says, a boy. And I said, you're happy? And she said, yeah, but I don't know what Raul's going to say. Next morning after he went to work, she called me and she said, he's all excited. And I said, I thought you wanted a girl. And he said, I just didn't want you to be upset that if it was another girl. So he thought that far ahead for her sake after being a beating husband. So it proved to me that I was wrong in my first assumption. Now I'd like to make this a more active thing for you. And so instead of just sitting, I want you to stand up in a little bit, but I'll give you a little bit more heads up on it. I'd like to give you real stories of real people so you get more of an idea of the realism of our ministry. And so what I would have you do is put your volume up on as high as it goes so you can hear me. And you can either take the video off if you want to be just kind of in your own realm, or you can leave your video on. It's up to you. And then go to the farthest point in the room from where you are, where your screen is, so that you've got the most distance to walk. And you're going to have 10 to 12 questions to answer. So take small enough steps that if you answered all of them yes, you'd be back at your chair. Questions about that from anybody? Okay, so go and get to your point and then I'll get started. Okay, each time that I name a reason that someone is poor, I will ask you to compare your reason, their reason, to your own life. If you have a same situation in your life history, you just stay where you are. If you've never ever experienced it, then you take a small step toward your toward your screen. And that would say, I am blessedly free of this experience in my life. So this very first person is Renee. He was born with P4- syndrome, which is because of his dad's crack addiction. So at age 9 months, I drove him and his mother to Wichita, which is a 200-mile journey, to his first appointment in the clinic for children with special health care needs. He has 20 of the 25 issues of this syndrome. So here at age 21, you see he still has no muscle control. He has to have the seat belt to keep him upright, and his hands do nothing. He has almost no brain power, therefore no muscle control. What you cannot see is his esophagus is so small that even water won't go down it. He cannot talk. So at this point, if you were healthy when you were born, take your first step forward. Margarita is the next person. She was born in the mountains of El Salvador. Girls never went to school there. If you had the privilege of an education, any kind of education, take one step forward. Martha, growing up in a rural area of Mexico, couldn't understand why her older siblings moved to the US. She was never going to do so. When she held her little Jorgito in her arms and knew that even though Mexico guarantees free education until grade 6, in their rancho area, the best he could get was a 3rd grade education. She and her husband both had 9th grade educations, so made the risky trip across the river for little Jorgito's future. So if you were educated up to grade 6, take another step forward. Cassandra and her boyfriend moved out of their own homes a month before little Maddie was born. She did finish her sophomore year in high school and planned to return, but never did. Dad never went back for his senior year in high school either. They struggle financially because of the lower paying jobs they have, even though they do qualify for food stamps and Maddie has Medicaid. If you graduated high school, take a step forward. If you never have faced eviction because of overdue rent, Take another step forward. Cesar was brought to the U.S. by his dad's brothers, who lived in Chicago, to save his life. His father had been murdered by a gang, and his mother was pressuring the police to solve the crime. The uncles told her that the gang would murder her only son to get her to stop, but she still pressed forward. Cesar is now 42, speaks perfect English, and has the Spanish white skin and blue eyes. No one would ever guess he is undocumented by looking at him. Unfortunately, his uncles never got him legal status. In Kansas, he cannot get a driver's license and cannot work legally. His wife is also undocumented. Cesar works 2 jobs and is the most creative person I know in finding yet another job when for some reason one of the current ones no longer needs him or the employer gets nervous about paying someone under the table. If you have had a stable income for all of your adult life, take a step forward. If you have a driver's license and can have no problem renewing it, take another step forward. A month after coming into Garden City from a refugee camp in Thailand, Komang's 8-year-old daughter collapsed on a hot day in July while playing outside. In the ER, they found that she had a hole in her heart that would have been surgically fixed in the US before age 1. She had to go to Children's Mercy in Kansas City for her surgery. As a new refugee, Komang was not yet qualified to take his driving test. His English wasn't too good either. So I drove them to Kansas City and acted as an interpreter for them, using the simplest English I could figure out to explain to him what the medical team was saying and doing, since I don't know Burmese, any of the 5 dialects, and he doesn't know English very well. If you've never have found that your health has suffered for lack of proper health care of any kind, take a step forward. If you never have been in a situation in another culture or another country where you couldn't understand what was going on, what was being said, take another step. The only family I serve that has a pet is a lady who lives on the edge of town and raises chickens. Selling the eggs is her only means of income. When she gets desperate, she knows a lady that will pay her $20 for a dressed chicken that's been raised organic, so she does that. She and her husband were denied the renewal of their political asylum from Guatemala because they could not prove that they would be killed if they went back. They were simple people living in a remote area. The guerrillas wanted her husband, Alex, to join them. He didn't want to kill anyone, so he and Juana fled. No one reported them as fleeing for their lives. One summer day, 4 months after the judge denied their renewal, Alex was taken from their trailer home and deported. Juana and the 3 children moved after immigration came after her 3 times, and she wasn't home, thank God. She never does anything to get herself traceable. That's why she raises chickens and sells the eggs, because she doesn't want to be shown as having a job. She needs that dog to protect her chickens from the coyotes and raccoons since they live on the edge of town. Otherwise, she doesn't have a way to make a living. So if you have enough money to have the luxury of having a pet, take a step forward. When you are ready, you can sit down at your computer and we'll start again. I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions.
I just would like to interrupt for 1 second. If anyone is not on active...
We lived with separate families so that we would not be speaking English at home with each other. So 4 hours at the instituto each day. I needed 4 hours after that to put it into my head. And then I easily had 2 hours worth of conversation at the family I lived with. I asked to be with families that had children because I wanted to see the cultural interaction so that I would understand the families better that I would serve. What we didn't know is that because both Rosrita and I are good at math, it's easier to learn a new language. If you think about this symbol and what it stands for, going from that to triangle and the meaning of triangle in your brain, you do the same thing to go from language to language. And so that's why we were able to do it. Our ministry, though, has evolved. And so during these 23 years, I have served people born in 28 countries. And I only know 2 of the 35 languages that they speak. That's in the middle of nowhere in western Kansas. And it's because we have lots of jobs you don't need English for. You can work at a packing plant, you can work at a feedlot, you can work in construction, all kinds of agricultural stuff. So now today, we have refugees coming and we have Anglos coming from all over. Now, if you're a refugee, to qualify to come to the United States, you have to have somebody in the family that knows English. Our school district does have a Burmese and a Vietnamese liaison for families, so they can help with dialects from their countries. Unfortunately, that's all they have, so I have to depend upon a friend that knows more English or somebody in the family that's there. Also, just a side comment, we learn lots of unique things. So for instance, if I'm from a tropical area like Somalia or Burma, I sleep on a bamboo mat that's probably about 1.5 inches thick because the bamboo wicks away the sweat when it's hot. So if I'm from there and I need something to sleep on, I'm used to this. So the mattress, and then maybe the box springs on top of it, but no bed frame because that's dangerous. I'm going to be too high off the floor. And so you learn to work with those different kinds of concepts. Also, there is one of the groups that the thumbs up that we think is wonderful, they just can't stand. Now, they won't tell me what it means, but it's worse than our showing the finger type of thing. So I guess I don't want to know what it means. Excuse me. When Albert and I go out to give out furniture, usually this English-speaking person is the one that's at work. And so when we get through giving them the bed, the mattress or whatever, I go like this and say, sleep well tonight. And I figured they can understand that that's what I'm saying, because that's the only thing I know how to say, to do with their culture. This year, I went to the Burmese New Year, and that's the next slide. And you can see all different kinds of colors. Every part of Burma, the different groups have different styles. And this was their celebration done at our local high school because it has a big cafeteria they could do it in. We do try to interact with these various cultures in any way that presents itself. And we have a multicultural festival in the fall here in Garden City that we usually go to. Excuse me. When the bomb threat came back in before our election in 2016, we went to the vigil outside of the area that was going to be bombed because these white supremacists wanted to get rid of the Muslims in our area. And they called the little apartment that they were using for their prayer time I forgot the name of it now, a mosque, and they wanted to bomb that. And so we went to the prayer vigil outside of that apartment. All of us in the town were saying, we want to protect your right to worship as you wish. And so that was an important piece to them. Okay. The piece that we have to do in order to know what exists, we have to use the things that do exist and not invent the wheel type of thing. because we don't want to duplicate. And so I was one of the 23 sisters that met in January of '95 for a discernment weekend to plan our direct ministry with the economic poor that our chapter had previous fall said that we would do. The Holy Spirit blessed us in so many details that we could never, ever have known ahead of time. So in the plan was that the first 2 months that the people were in Garden City to start the ministry, they were to go to all the social agencies to learn about existing resources so we wouldn't duplicate them. Now, if you look back on that, or as I look back on it, all these years later, there was no way that we could have known that this would be so important, because not only did we learn what existed, they learned that we were going to start something to fill in the cracks. And so that's why the agencies will call and say, I serve this person in this and this and this, but they need something else. Do you do it? Can you do it? Or can you find somebody else? Do you know somebody else that does? So all these years later, we still attend the Community Services Council, which is once a month for 1 hour, and the social agencies come and tell what is new in their agency as service or what their new need is. And that way we connect back and forth, rapid contact. And so, for instance, a lady calls and says, I need help for food. Then I give them the information about Emmaus House, about Salvation Army's offering. And so it all works together. If a person has no car, can't stand in line, I take their boxes to them. So this shows me delivering a food box to one of the families out in the trailer park. I have Hilda that was injured in a wreck, and she can't stand in line. She can't move a hand, and her leg just kind of drags because of her trauma injury, so I bring hers to her. Okay, then the next one is to create resources where none exist. So Sister Rosarita decided that, I'll back up. In my 4-pay job, half-time, I work with parents as teachers, and so often the other educators will give me a family to help. So they gave me that Martha that I talked about earlier, and she needed help applying for medical card for her little baby. And then she said, I want to work, but I can't drive. And so I talked to Sister Rosarita about it in our every Thursday morning reflection time. She said, well, maybe I can do that. So she has now over 400 people that have driver's licenses. They either are Spanish speaking or illiterate. And she even helped a Mennonite lady who knew German and some Spanish. And her husband was with her until she learned enough of the Spanish for driving, and then Sister Rosarita did the rest of it. She instructs them in the laws so they can pass the written exam, and she practices driving with them until they're ready to pass that. She's been in 3 wrecks, one of which could have taken both her and the lady out, but the people that were oncoming acted fast, so it worked out fine. So she's got nerves of steel. The furniture I already talked to you about, and even a mattress that's got a stain in it is better than sleeping on the floor, so that doesn't have to always be perfect. We run a community garden. We created this after a fire at the other packing plant left 2,300 people jobless on Christmas Eve night. This shows Sister Rosarita helping Oscar at his plot in the garden. And if you look in the background, you can see other plots. We have it for the poor. The city donates water because we were grandmothered in, because the Presbyterian Church years ago had one and they gave them the water. So families that have no land space, like at their apartment complex, it's all concrete and apartments, or people that don't have the money for the water, all they have to do is pay $10 for a 10 by 20 foot lot and put in 1 hour of work to keep the place up. And Sister Rosarita manages that every summer. Transportation. If you live in a trailer park on the outskirts of town and have no vehicle, you might need transportation to WIC or medical appointments. Medical and immigration trips out of town are impossible for some families. They might have a car, but if they got it up to highway speed, it would self-destruct. So I'm kneeling there, putting in Maribel's cell phone to get it to charge up. And we're at a lawyer's office in Kansas City. Matt was a 5th grade student of mine in Great Bend in 1969. I taught for 26 years before I came to this ministry. And so he decided that he wanted to do pro bono work for people that I had that didn't have the money. So he took on with somebody else in his firm that specializes in asylum cases, Maribel, because as a poor woman from Guatemala, she has no way to be safe from an abusing husband. She goes to the police, they do nothing, and her husband might kill her for it. He was starting to threaten he was going to take their 2-year-old and leave. And so she came up with that little girl. Absolutely scared spitless, the little girl also. She has only a 50% chance at getting this, but after all of the legal work, she got her case put in on the docket. Now we went already at the beginning of 2019, and the court date is August the 4th of 2021. So she's got to wait 4 years. But in that time, she has legal status. So she can work legally now and not have to worry if she gets stopped by, caught by anything. She's got that document. She's got a social security number until that happens. So it shows you how broken our immigration system is. We've worked all these 4 years to get it to this point, and we still have another whole year to wait. Then I talked about being linked with the people in need and the agencies that have it, that helps us to be advocates. So housing is a huge need in our town. There never will be enough housing for people at the bottom end. Last year, over 240 children were labeled homeless in our school district because they were living doubled up with somebody when they didn't want to be. And so we keep going to the city council and saying, do something about the housing. The driver's license office, Sister Rosrita, has been told by some of her clients that when she's there, they're treated nicer than when she's not. There's 1 or 2 people, I guess, in the office that are a bit on the prejudice side. Undocumented children in Kansas cannot have health insurance. Also, families that fall in the gap where they learn too much, but they don't have enough to pay for health insurance privately, don't have it. And so we've been advocating for that. Everybody of our legislators from our area wants it to happen, that we expand it, which our state did not, unfortunately. But we can't get the people from the rest of the state to figure that out. Also, just to talk to agencies, like in the beginning with the CanCare, when it took over the Medicaid in our state, they send everything out in English. And then at the bottom of the paper, it says, if you need it in another language, reapply. Well, it says that in English. So how are you going to know what to do? And so talking to people like that to say, get real with it. Or even on the phone, they say all this stuff in English. And then they say, and if you need Spanish, put it on this. Well, say good morning in English, say it in Spanish, and say which number for each of them right away, because the people give up before that. Immigration justice at our state and federal level. Unfortunately, we had a Secretary of State that did some really ugly stuff. He's the one that helped the Arizona laws be so harsh way back. He has in his head he's going to become our next president, but somewhere down the line, but just really awful kinds of laws. We keep our local community college started way back. If a student went to either of the 2 high schools in our county for at least 3 years, they got state tuition for even if they're undocumented. And so that has allowed people to go to college that could not have otherwise. And we need it badly because we need always more health professionals, more law enforcement people, more educators. You can't attract people to the middle of nowhere in Southwest Kansas easily. And so these students are our next professionals, and we're always going to need those. Immigration is totally broken, as all of you probably know, and so always continuing to try to work with that. I was a part of our Community Health Coalition and still am, but have been for all the years that it existed. And one of the needs that we said was very, very important was to be able to get a transportation. It took us 3 years doing all the kind of community type of contact we could and going to the city council to get a transportation system set up. So it's 10 passenger buses that do routes throughout the city. And at the last time we went to the city council, one of the councilmen said, "We'll spend all this money and nobody will use it." And I had reached the end of my patience. So I said in my kindest voice, "Well, that's because you have a garage with 1, 2, or 3 cars. I'm asking for this for people who have no car, have no way to get anywhere." And his face kind of went blank. So now for something that nobody would use, we have over 5,000 rides a month. And so they are now very proud of it. And another city that's not real far from us had people angry because their city didn't have it and our city did. And so now the council thinks it's wonderful. We advocate for a living wage, trying to get things to get a little bit better on that part. Although there are more and more people out of work with this COVID. Even before COVID, there were people that didn't. If you think back to the 2007, 2008 time, people were coming from all over. Like there was a family that came to us from Wisconsin. Mom, dad, 3 kids, and what they could put in the car. When both mom and dad lost their job, they ended up coming to Garden City because they knew that unemployment here was only 3%, while in their state in Wisconsin, it was huge. So we're serving more Anglos who have come because of that, more US-born citizens of all types. And besides those needs, we spend time reading, interpreting mail for people because English is their second language or they're totally illiterate. The phone menus are really, really difficult for people. And so we have to stop and think about that with them as well and help them work through it. Sister Rosrita has become a senior health insurance counselor of Kansas. It's called SHIC. She helps elderly choose the right health plans for their situation and feels the great need for Spanish-speaking SHIC advisors because our local senior citizen center doesn't always have somebody. Filling out applications for food stamps or Medicaid for the children or whatever, we help a lot through that also. Some families don't have a phone. Their last cell phone died and they don't have the money or they have no minutes on it, so we help them make calls on our cell phone. Supporting women caught in domestic violence, often by economic conditions or pressures from the broken immigration system. And that seems to be something I specialize in. I end up with more people like that than anything else, like I told you about Gasella. But I have at least 5 families where the children didn't have to continue seeing all of that. The husbands either left or quit drinking or quit beating, and so things are going better. I don't know if some of those husbands ever knew that I knew there was domestic violence. Like the guy, Giselle and her husband, Raul, I don't know if he ever knew that I knew really what happened because I never talked about it with him. But the fact is, they've changed and that's what's important. We also need to just be with the family in their grief, in their loneliness because they can't go back to Burma for their family, or just celebrate things, the baptism, the birthday, or whatever. that's an important piece, to be with them in their good times too. We also, with that awareness on our part, have done something with our own diocesan church. We are a part of the Hispanic ministries in our diocese committee. And one day we were there doing a needs assessment, what's not being met for our immigrant families. And at the end of the brainstorming session, Father Schrimmer, who was leading it, stood there in quiet, and we're all thinking, what's going on? He said, you know, looking at all of this on these white sheets with all the words on it, there are two sets of realities. One is from the parish window and one is from the window of the home. And he turned and looked at Sister Rosarita and at me and said, you give us a whole different light on the ministry of the church. And so that empowered us to keep going, working with that. We are involved in the 2 local parishes here, Catholic parishes, and we attend Our Lady of Guadalupe celebrations. This shows you the Matachina dancers of various types that are at that. It's always on the evening of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and they have a whole celebration on the weekend before that of food and dancing and singing and all of that. Here in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, we have at St. Mary's equal numbers of Spanish and English masses every weekend and during the week. At St. Dominic's, we have a Burmese mass once a month and a Vietnamese mass every Sunday. And so people of those different cultures can celebrate in their own language and in their own way. As a way of hopefully attracting vocations to religious life, Sister Rosarita and I have helped with the Arco Iris Encuentro, which is like Tech, Teens Encounter Christ for Anglos. We've done it for 15 years. Thus far, no women have come to want to join us, but several men have ended up going off into religious life or becoming priests. And one was supposed to make final vows May 23rd in San Antonio, but it got put on hold because of the coronavirus.